Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast. I'm Chris Muntz, the host, and this is episode 29, part 4, and final part of the February Choral Podcast Miniseries, Choral Music, a Human Art Form. The guest for this episode is Dr. Christopher Harris of Arkansas Tech University, who is also a composer and an up-and-coming conductor, and we're going to be talking about his thoughts and our thoughts on the ideas around representation that can be passed on to the next generation. The next step, you might say, of the conversations that we've been having on this series so far. What do we do now? Where do we go from here? And how can this generation of educators pass on the torch of representation to the next generation? This is a really fun conversation, including a composer-exposer episode for Graphite, because Christopher's music can be found there. So just lots of fun stuff and some really serious stuff going on in this episode. I hope you enjoy. Voce Vista Video is blowing my mind every single time I use it. I'm still about 2 years or so in the classroom of using this product. It's something I use about monthly, sometimes not even every month, but every bi-monthly, but I use it pretty regularly in my voice studio, and I'll throw it up on the screen in choir rehearsals, and it allows us as a choir to see the entire overtone spectrum that we are creating when we sing. It shows even if the vowel is not the right shape, not the right resonance, the overtones change and kids can see it. So they can see immediately that they're not singing a pure O anymore. They can see that they're not singing a pure E. Or if the basses are singing a pitch and the tenors join an octave above, they can see immediately that it was skewed up above the pitch or below the pitch. They can see exactly where it is. And for our visual learners and our differentiated learning, that's huge. So check that out. Go to vocevista.com/choralosophy. And then you can try it for free for 30 days. And then once the trial's up, you can put in the code and purchase that and get the discount. Also, we have sitereadingfactory.com, where if you are not on that yet this school year, first of all, you're way behind. I'm not trying to shame you, but get on there. Sitereadingfactory.com is $35 a year for your membership. And then just for a couple bucks a kid, you can add a student membership for each kid, and it's hugely beneficial. You can get the full package, everything that you get if you use your Choralosophy discount code. That'll work there as well. But it's not too late. That's the thing. You can start this stuff with literacy skills with your kids, and you don't need to go buy a How to Teach Literacy textbook. You really don't. You have everything that you need right there. Go listen to episode 18 on this show, where I kind of outline the process. And if you have questions, shoot me an email, but it is not too late. You can start in January. You can start in February. So head to sitereadingfactory.com and grab yourself a membership. Well, everybody, I'm here with Christopher Harris, and I'm excited to have Christopher on the show. He's getting all set soon to be a presenter at SWACTA. This episode will probably come out before the convention starts, and we're going to touch on all kinds of issues as part of my February series, Choral Music, a Human Art Form, and I'm excited to have Christopher on the show. Christopher, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Well, we're going to start out just letting you get yourself acquainted with our audience and them with you by just letting you tell your story. Who is Christopher Harris? Little Chrissy, as I used to be called as a fellow Christopher, all the way up to now. What's the short version of your life story?
Short version. Well, my nickname when I was younger was actually Little Chris or Lil C. I have two older siblings. And I was at the time I was the youngest and last one to come through the school. So everyone always called me, "Oh, you're the little Harris, or you're Little Chris." And I was also quite short and quite little. So I'm from Fort Worth, Texas. Born and raised in Fort Worth. Went to LD Bell High School and the HEB ISD. Graduated, got my bachelor's from Texas Southern University. Taught in Houston, Texas Southern's in Houston, Texas. Taught in Houston. Went to Ithaca to get my master's in choral conducting, then to Florida State. And from Florida State, graduated with a degree, PhD in choral music ed. And now I'm the director of choral activities at Arkansas Tech University, which is where I'm at right now in my office here at Arkansas Tech.
Okay, that's great. Take us back a little bit. I guess that you did exactly what I asked you to do, which is to give the short version. So thank you. But I do want to dig in a little bit more to your background and ask specifically, what was your introduction to choral music? So what got you into it from your earliest memory?
My earliest memory would definitely be in 7th grade. We had to select, I think, 3 electives in junior high. And I definitely chose Spanish because that's, we have to have a language. And I definitely chose athletics because I was an athlete and a little sporty guy, still play sports, but of course back then sports were like my life. And then so I needed a third one and I didn't have one. And my sister and brother had both been in choir. And so I just completely arbitrarily elected choir. And actually the first day I selected music, and the first day they put me in band and had one band rehearsal, and it was the most miserable experience of my life. It wasn't really a rehearsal. It was like the first day where the teacher's going over procedures and stuff and how to walk in the room and where to put your instrument. And I was like, what? And I don't know what's going on. And so then they put me in choir. And then that was the first time I'd ever been in choir. It was at Euless Junior High, in Hurst, Euless, Bedford Independent School District in Texas.
So was there a charismatic teacher at all involved in that, or was this really just like dumb luck that you fell into a choir class?
100% dumb luck.
Oh wow!
If my older siblings would have been in band, I would have selected band. Or if they would have been, ROTC, I would have just selected ROTC. I literally just needed a third elective.
Okay, wow, that's interesting. So, because usually when I talk to people, I actually kind of like that origin story because it's unique in that a lot of people that I talk to have some kind of my parents did it, or there was music in the home or something, and that's so traditional, but it's kind of refreshing to see somebody who does it for a living now, but didn't kind of have that growing up loving it from your early years. That's interesting. I like that.
Yeah. I like to tell people, like when I talk to kids, and students in different scenarios, I tell them like I was just a regular guy. Like I was just a regular kid. I didn't grow up taking voice lessons. Didn't grow up taking piano lessons. It wasn't anything like that. I was just, I grew up running around outside playing sports and scraping my knees up and that was my experience. And it just so happened that I just happened to luck up and get in choir in 7th grade. And even then, I mean, I apparently had a really good singing voice, but it was just, I was that kid I was a tenor whose voice was unchanged. It was really sweet and I could sing all the way up to like high C's and above with ease. And I just so happened to have a really good voice. And that was kind of the beginning of my love story with choir music.
That's great. I love it. That's awesome. So since Christopher is also, for my audience members listening now, also a composer on graphite. And as many of us know, graphite is one of our sponsors on the show. So we're going to, as we're continuing to just break the ice and get to know Chris Harris here, we're going to make you one of our Composer Exposer episodes. So how does that sound okay?
I love it.
Okay. So we're going to start out with a rapid fire round. So Christopher Harris, you are the next victim on the Composer Exposer. Your job is to simply respond with whatever comes to your mind to these prompts. Ready?
That's terrifying.
I know.
As ready as I'm going to be.
Okay, here we go. Texting or talking?
Talking.
Favorite city in the U.S. besides the one you live in?
Oh, no, it's hard. Houston, Texas.
Okay.
Except for the traffic, which is horrible.
Oh, well, yes, I've heard, and the humidity. Yeah. Favorite holiday?
Christmas.
Taylor Swift is blank.
A singer.
Very politically correct. I like it. Scale of 1 to 10, how good are you at keeping secrets?
1,000.
Wow, that's okay. Everybody knows who to trust. Call Christopher Harris. All right, next, Ariel or Jasmine?
Woo! 100% Jasmine.
All right, I agree. That's the correct answer. Favorite junk food?
Hamburgers, but they got to be greasy and cheesy and all the fat dripping off.
Again, correct answer. This is going well for you. Favorite ice cream flavor?
Chocolate.
If Voldemort offered you a hug, would you accept?
No.
Is double dipping at a party ever acceptable?
No.
All right.
Never.
Are reindeers real?
Yeah, the ones that don't fly on Santa's sleigh.
Correct. How are we feeling right now about Kanye?
Oh, that's controversial. Oh no. Oh, as an artist, I feel good, but that's about it.
Well, that's fair. That is a fair answer. How often is it healthy to cry?
as often as you can.
As often as you can?
As often as you can, absolutely.
Okay, all right, that's great. Well, you made it. That's awesome. See, that wasn't too bad. If Kanye is the worst thing you have to deal with in that, then
True.
all right.
I feel
So,
better.
why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the music you have on Graphite? Even if you had to just pick one thing that you were really proud of that they sell on Graphite Publishing of Christopher Harris's music, what should people check out?
I'll say two things. I'm supposed to say one. I'm breaking
That's
the rules.
fine.
I'm sorry. There's two pieces that I really love. It's hard for me to talk about my music. Well, it used to be hard for me to talk about my music, but now that I'm a little older, I kind of, after I make a create a piece of music and compose something, it's kind of its own thing, and so it's not. I may have had a part in making it, but it's its own thing.
Hmm.
So there's two pieces that there's one arrangement and then one composition that I was really blown away after they were completed. The first is an arrangement of "Were You There?" It's a traditional African American spiritual, but I kind of realized it with some really contemporary harmonies, which is basically my harmonic palette. And it's a really wonderful piece. I actually originally wrote it for the FSU, was Florida State University Gospel Choir, and it was like a traditional 3-part piece. Then it evolved into like 4 or 5. And it was a cappella, which is not normal for gospel music. So it's really powerful. Lots of high belty singing, which kind of I kind of got that from the gospel roots, roots that it was composed for, arranged for, and just really, allows the singers to just open up and really sing nice and full.
That sounds great. That's one of my favorite tunes. I love that.
The arrangement of it is not. I've never heard one that's quite like this. So,
okay, great.
Yeah. So, were you there? It's SATB. It's probably obviously for a more advanced high school or collegiate group and beyond. The other piece is called "Hallelujah for This Day," and the text is written by a wonderful living poet. Her name is Devondra Banks, and she is probably, to me, like the best thing next to sliced bread. I mean, she has some of the most thoughtful, profound ways of speaking about the human experience, using words that you wouldn't think of, but that are deep and thought-provoking. And it's an SATB piece with piano. When I conceived it, I called her and I said, "Hey, I want to talk about Christmas without saying Jesus Christ, because I don't want to make it a religious thing, but I still want to maintain the depth of who Jesus is and the depth of the story of Christ, and without it being a religious church thing necessarily." So she crafted this wonderful piece that is about the night that Christ was born, and just the way she talked about it is like I had no idea that's what this was about. But then when it hits you, it's like, wow.
Be sure to head over to graphitepublishing.com, where you can get 10% off of all of your orders with your promo code Choralosophy. You'll be able to find Christopher's music, along with many other composers you know, Eric Barnum, Jocelyn Hagan, Tim Takash, and many more at graphitepublishing.com. So Chris is heading to SWACTA, like I mentioned, to give a session. So I thought it'd be good to just start out by letting you plug that a little bit, and so we could get rolling on some of the things that you're passionate about. So tell us a little bit about the session you're giving.
Yeah, there's 2 sessions now that I'm doing. The first is on Wednesday, and it is about programming. It's called Programming with Purpose, and it's kind of geared towards collegiate students and maybe first, second year teachers, people that are early in the teaching profession. And the second session is on Thursday, and it's something that I'm incredibly passionate about. And it's called The Black Composer, More Than Jazz, Gospel, and Spiritual. And it focuses on African American composers that write in styles that I think largely are overlooked. Mm-hmm. And I think that largely people don't always know where to access their music and where to find pieces that are written. Oftentimes, much like songs on the radio that may come from a really great album, oftentimes the songs that are played the most on the radio don't necessarily represent the full body of work of the artist. Occasionally, the songs that are played are the best ones, but frequently they're not. And so you have to do a little bit more digging. And so this session focuses on, providing a vehicle for people to become familiar with these composers and what they're writing and that they are writing, and that if you would like to find a piece by African American female or African American male that's on this subject or that subject, that's for this voicing, for this occasion, it's out there, and I'm going to try to help shed some light on that.
Yeah, and that's awesome that you're doing that. And of course, as you know, we did an episode here on the show with Marcus Garrett on that very topic. It was actually one of the my audience's favorite episodes of 2019. So there is definitely an interest in that topic, and scholars like yourself and with Marcus spreading that word. I think that's an awesome thing. In fact, the reason I asked is because I think that's a perfect segue into some of the things that I wanted to dive into you or with you on this episode, with the idea that people wouldn't always know unless they're presented with this information what composers are out there. I mean, that ties directly in my mind into this concept that I've been talking about a lot on the show in February related to representation. If you don't see that certain people from certain types of backgrounds and walks of life are involved in an industry, I don't care what the industry is, if you don't see people involved in it that look like you, or even just like me as a white guy, I didn't know that there were all these composers out there because I wasn't taught that in school. And so I think the important thing there is that we are presenting a picture of a more inclusive, this series is called, human version of the choral world. Is that something that's important to you too?
Yes, man. I can't, especially now that I have the platform that I do as a collegiate professor. It is, I think, in some ways, probably one of the most important things that we can do as educators, and one of the most important things that I would like to address daily in my classes and daily with my students. I think it's very necessary. So yeah, it's very important to me.
Do you see that as a responsibility as a college professor? And I'm sure, as you just said, you did, but I'm just curious. Do you see that as a responsibility for yourself as a relatively young Black male teacher to represent that demographic in the education world and in the conducting world?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. So growing up, I had, and I'm not terribly old, and what I mean by that is, I'm not from a time where somebody may say, "Oh, well, of course you're not going to have a Black teacher because of whatever time." But I grew up in the '90s and in the 2000s, and so, and I still never had a Black male teacher, never, with the exception of coaches. And so, my musical desires and my musical interests, and eventually my talents that manifested themselves into a degree and then a career and so on and so forth, I never saw in anyone. I had really amazing, strong choral directors growing up. They were all female and they were all white. And so I didn't see a Black male until I got to my undergrad, and I went to an HBCU, that's a historically Black college or university. And so my voice teacher was a Black male named Dr. Jason Obi. He was the first person that I saw kind of doing what I wanted to do. And honestly, I don't know that if I had gone somewhere else, that I'd be me that I am today. I don't know. Maybe, I know when I was as a composer, the people that I listened to were not Black and they weren't Black males, with the exception of maybe like Moses Hogan. But for a long time, he was probably the only person that I could say, let me look back. Yeah. Maybe like William Dawson, but other than that, and those are spiritual composers, and that's not necessarily the category I'd put myself in. Is a composer and arranger of spirituals. So luckily I was headstrong enough to have, and I had such a strong undying passion that I was going to compose the way I composed. But really and truly, the people that I was looking at, either intentionally or just orally in my mind were like Brahms and Morton Lauritsen and Eric Whitacre and individuals like that. So, but there's probably somebody out there who, unless they see someone doing what they're doing, well, I'll tell you this: I have a young woman in my choir, and she's an African American young woman, and she came up to me after her first semester here. She's a really gifted singer, and she was a freshman that was put in my top choir. She's just really, really great, very gifted. And she came up to me and was like, "Hey, Dr. Harris, I just want to tell you that I'm so glad that you are who you are, because I didn't grow up seeing black choral directors, and definitely not black female choral directors, but you give me inspiration to continue doing what I want to do." That's pretty overwhelming
Mm-hmm.
to hear, like just my presence, like just me being a person doing what I'm doing, and providing that representation for her as a young future music educator was life changing enough for her that she had to come up and tell me that she was so appreciative of who I was and the experiences that I was giving her. And I have to imagine that experience is not um, um, singular. I mean, other people are having that. I know I have the same experience in different ways. So
Yeah, that's kind of what was going to lead to my next question, also, which is that within every generation of people, uh, there are those trailblazer types. They are the ones who are willing to jump into a field or a profession, even though no one like them has done it before. And we love those stories. Like, we love to. There's always a movie later about that person, and there's
yeah,
tons throughout history. But the reality is that not every kid in our classrooms is going to be one of those types that would step forward into a world that doesn't seem to, at least visually, welcome them, if that makes sense. And so, what is it about you, even though you grew up without having a black choral director? What do you think it was? You're still here, I guess, is my point. And so, I think that's I'd like to analyze that in two ways. What was it about you that made you do it anyway? But then, now that you're here doing what you do, how much easier do you think you could make it for the next generation of young black kids that might want to be music teachers?
yeah. So this is a little bit of my personality, um, just in general. Uh, but so I knew I had a passion. So let me just start with that. Well, let me tell like I should. I had a great gift, um, and I mean that in the literal sense. It was something that was given to me. I had the ability to cultivate it, but I had a great gift, and I was a recipient of it, and really didn't even fully realize the scope of the gift. So I was given a great gift for music, and I think my greatest gift is probably understanding and being able to process music and hear it and break it down to a fundamental level, and then know how to use those blocks. That's probably what my brain, uh, how I would explain the gift that I had from music. Well, fast forward, I was a part of amazing choirs in junior high and in high school, really great choirs, and so I developed a love and a passion. And eventually, when I got to college, interestingly enough, I tell people this all the time, but only people that knew me in undergrad can verify this. I was not a good singer. I'm much better now, but I was not a good singer. I was like an okay singer. I've always been a stellar musician, and people with my church would tell me that. And my point in saying that is to say that I always had an interest in music and being a strong musician, and and eventually had a curiosity about composing and about writing and all that stuff. So that was my passion and my gift. And eventually, I got to a place where I was unapologetic for the gift that I had, and I was going to pursue it. Period. In the story.
Hmm.
That's more of a spiritual thing, but um, that's that was it for me. And so whether I was orange, green, brown, male, female, transgendered, or any or all of the above, I was going to do this. Um, minus minus that influence in my life, I don't know that I'd be here. I probably would have elected to go be an engineer and make, 6, 7 figures maybe, or a doctor or a lawyer.
Right.
So for me, that was the thing that was in me. That was, I'm going to do this because I have a gift. There's a calling, and I'm going to accept it. Period. So the second, can you say the second part of that question?
So now that you're here, doing what you're doing, do you, and this kind of goes back to the responsibility question I asked before, is do you see a role for yourself as a mentor to the next generation of younger kids that might now be able to see themselves as an educator because they see you as an educator?
I do. I think a part of our job, and I'll just speak for myself, that is overwhelming, that I was not prepared for, is the role as role model and mentor that Black people, for an example, take on for other Black people. Really, for anyone. I hate to attach race to it because it's not about race, except it is. But it's not, except it absolutely is.
I get it. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Exactly. Yeah. I'm going to jump in to remind you that you can join this conversation. If you're hearing things that you would like to chime in on as we discuss, we have a couple of ways you can do that. One is a smallish and private Facebook page called Choralosophers, where if you are hearing something you'd like to weigh in on an episode, that is what that page is for. So feel free to just go type a response to what and engage the other audience members in what they think as well. If you want an even more exclusive experience to discuss the show issue, there is a Patreon page, patreon.com/Choralosophy. For as little as $3 a month, you can get that opportunity to discuss with myself and with other listeners who are very close to the show. But you are also going to get extra content on Patreon. There is an episode once a month that goes on there that is just for you Patreon subscribers, as well as any other supplemental materials that I might collect for each episode. So join the conversation. I want to hear from you.
And, I do find myself, I went to my choir sang at the Allstate conference this last weekend, actually, in Arkansas. And I can't tell you, after the choir sang and after people have heard us rehearse, and then after people have seen us perform at different concerts, there's a larger number of minority students that I feel, I'd like to think, feel more comfortable coming up and speaking to me maybe than they would otherwise. I don't know if that's, I don't have any hard facts for that, but I always get more minorities that come and speak to me, and I get to speak to them about music. And it's interesting because in the Black community, largely, I'm going to speak in general terms, it's not true of every situation, but largely, classical music is not the thing that we're taught
right
to care about. And often, I remember growing up myself growing up, I was not like an amazing gospel singer or R&B singer, which are the basic forms in the Black culture that if you're going to be a musician, you're expected to sing R&B or jazz or gospel or something like that. Yeah. And that wasn't my story. And I can see that exact story in the students that come and walk up to me. I can see that they're like, hey, my thing is not gospel. I'm not going to run everywhere, and I can't do that, and I can't belt. But oh my God, I sang this piece. I sang your I Am Loved, and it transfixed me. Or, man, I got to sing Jake Runstad's Let My Love Be Heard, and I was so moved. And oftentimes, they don't have a vehicle to express that. Mm-hmm. I think very innocently, moms and dads and maybe brothers and sisters and close loved ones, they just can't relate unless you just happen to have a choral musician in your family that's close to you. I think that there's just no outlet for them. And when you see another brown person that looks like you, and you see that your passions seem to align, it's such a powerful tool for inspiration and encouragement for those younger students that I wasn't ready for. I'll be honest, right. I wasn't ready for it, but I'm happy that it's there now.
Yeah, that brings up an interesting question. I'd love to get your take on this too. There is within academic circles some that would say that if that all that those other types of music that you just listed that might spark a passion in a young black kid, that those that like the Jake Renestad or the I am what was the other piece you said, when we love
I am
or
loved.
I
I
am
am
loved.
loved. Mhm.
Who is that by? Is that yours?
That happens to be by me. Yeah,
Oh, that's yours. Okay.
yeah.
So I just yeah. So you're listing these various types of choral music that don't fit into that gospel jazz, idiomatically black, as Marcus said on the episode,
Hmm.
um, music. But then there are some that would say, well, then you like white music, and which is something that really frustrates me. I don't hold that. I don't like that term. But like and we've talked about this on the show, and I'm just wondering how do you see that? If music is written by a white composer, is it white music?
Man, that's that's a wonderful question. I don't think that there's a yes or no answer to it. I think it's just one of those philosophical things. But I
Right.
absolutely don't think that. I think that the nature of music is too dynamic for it to be that singular. Um,
I agree. And in fact, we've got philosophy right in the name of the show. So sorry, you're gonna
yes, yeah, yeah,
you're gonna get philosophy on this show.
yeah. I think that while it is important um, to connect the identity of and the culture of music and music makers, I think that is of utmost importance that you give that credit where it needs to be due and recognize that yes, jazz did come from this person, this person, or Western music, if you trace it back, came from this, and these composers and musicians. But I think that in very similar to race, like there was a time where the races were this may get me in trouble. Generally speaking, purer, like back in the maybe 14, 15, 1600s. But as you travel through time, um, and races begin to mate with each other, and all of a
Hmm.
sudden you have a whole other um, race, essentially, a whole other race or a whole other racial ethnic makeup. It becomes a different thing.
Yeah.
Although there's Irish in there, and then there's maybe Nigerian and Native American, but it's its
Hmm.
own separate thing, and it's no longer this one thing. It's multiple, and so I think that music is like that as well. I absolutely have been privy to some conversations where people are like, well, that's white music or that's black music or whatever other label you want to put out there. But I think it's too dynamic to label, and I
Right.
think we lose something in the labeling of it. I do think, however, if you're gonna, as an example, if you want to talk about a Negro spiritual, we need to talk about it being a Negro spiritual and what that means culturally, what that means for the what that means for singers today in 2020, what that meant for the singer, the person experiencing that spiritual, uh, the slaves in the 17, 1800s, what that meant for them. I think you have to. I think it's too important to erase that. Um, but
Yeah, and I think
I'm taking the way around it and saying it's too dynamic to label.
yeah, I love that. I love that too dynamic to label idea. That's really good, and I because I agree with that. And I think even if you were to take the example of the Negro spiritual, I agree that it should be like you said before, credit given where credit's due, because the origin of the music is a certain time and a place with a certain people. But I think your point about the dynamic nature of the music is really good, because even now that the Negro spiritual, of course, has evolved and has grown and spread and traveled the globe and has been rearranged and sung by thousands upon thousands of white people. And I dare say many of them have probably really moved and made people better. And so the way I look at it is, if that's what music is for, which in my mind that's what music is to move people to a place that is better than even the Negro spiritual. can start in one place and then expand and become something, 200 years later that it was never intended to be. And I would make that same exact argument, by the way, about any kind of music. So even Mozart's
Agreed.
music, even Mozart's music started in Europe at a certain time and a place, and everyone happened around him happened to be white because that's who lived there at the time. But now that music has been taken and turned into so many different things by so many different people and means so many different things to so many different people that I wouldn't even call that his music Austrian music anymore. Like it's just music. So I don't know. I think every music has that property.
Agreed.
Yeah, but I also agree. I also agree though with you that you still have to, as just to be thorough and to be historically accurate, you still need to call it what it is, so that people know the history and they know where it came from. You're not going to start calling mariachi music, Finnish music. Well, no, it comes from Latin America, and so you'd call it what it is. And but even then, you'll find mariachi bands in Mexican restaurants in Europe. So like it goes everywhere. And so I think for me, that's like one of my favorite things about music. And I find it frustrating that I feel like we're kind of going back into a kind of regressive time period right now where some folks would really like us to keep putting labels on our music.
Yeah, this is the danger of this topic. It's like, so if we were to look at music, if we were to look at food the way we look at music, then we see that, okay, there are certain flavors and maybe certain ingredients that we use that we associate with Italian food.
Yeah.
It's going to be Italian, and or American food or Mexican food or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But just because there's oregano that is a very important flavor in this Italian food, that does not mean that if I take that oregano and use it over here, that just because I put oregano on a tortilla, oh, now this Mexican food is now Italian. Or now, oh no, I can't take that and use it over here because I have to use it in an Italian way, which that's crazy. But that's how we look at music. And I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer. I do think that if you are going to, if I'm going to be a Latin music, if I'm going to teach a song that's by a Latin composer or by a Negro composer, let me use a spiritual. I think the spiritual is a perfect example. Mm-hmm. If I'm going to teach a Negro spiritual, there are things that I should probably do and things that I probably shouldn't do to maintain the integrity of what that piece is, what that work is, and what it means. And if, as an example, I've seen this, and I'm sure you probably had some conversations about this, but just because it's rhythmic and syncopated doesn't mean I need to stand there and snap and move my body like this. That's not what the spiritual is.
Right.
And at that point, I have disrespected what the spiritual is. And so, see if I can articulate what I'm trying to say. Similarly, like if we take the food analogy, if I take spaghetti sauce and put cake batter in it, I hope people would say, I'm sorry, that's no longer spaghetti sauce, and I don't care how much you try. And if you put that over some pasta, I'm sorry, you're disrespecting what Italian food is and the beauty of those ingredients. And here's the kicker. Somebody may love that. Somebody may love tomato sauce with cake batter in it.
But you can't call it Italian anymore.
Exactly. And exactly.
It's okay to like that weird concoction. It's just not okay to say that it's the other thing when you've made your own. And I think that's where sometimes people get confused. Is we so badly want to be told that our preferences are good preferences, instead of not caring if other people like our preferences and are just like tolerating each other's preferences. So I feel like that's kind of the root of it. So let's say I like the spaghetti sauce with the cake batter in it. Not only do I want you to let me like it, but I want you to tell me that you like that I like it.
Yeah, you want me to validate.
Yes. Yes,
that
and
it's good and it's delicious and that your desires for it are healthy and
right.
you should have them.
Yes, and I think that's the world we're living in right now. But I'm sad to say it's a little bit of it's narcissism that is at the root of it. It's like I grew up in a time when probably the most um, forward-thinking liberal worldview was the idea of tolerance, where I don't need to like that you like the thing. I just need to let you do your thing, and that was considered to be a very lofty ideal. And now I feel like that's not enough. Like now
Yeah.
people, it's not enough to tolerate someone. You have to validate, as you said. And so I think that is part of this whole idea of that we're struggling with in our art form too, where and you probably haven't had a chance to listen to it. I've been putting out a lot of episodes this month as I'm like I'm at a peak production right now. So I just put out an episode like 3 days ago. We're doing another one today, and where we talked about this idea that with for some reason with black music in the U.S. White conductors have this fear of like you said, of the spiritual in particular. Are we doing it right? Are we oh, I don't want to snap at a certain time or do anything.
Hmm.
And it's not out of I don't think bad intentions. It's out of um it's almost like we're afraid to touch a live wire, kind of a thing. And there are a lot of conductors that I've seen and heard talk about where they just don't do certain types of music anymore because they're afraid that their interpretation of that music will be criticized, will be told that they didn't get it right and that they were disrespecting it. And so I don't know. It's hard because I feel like we don't want to send a message that that white conductors should leave this music alone, do we?
No, I don't think so. I think so. I've heard that. I actually just had a long conversation with some folks at the Arkansas All-State conference about it.
Uh huh.
I think so. Here is. I'm going to speak generally because there's always
Yeah.
exceptions, but I'm going to speak generally. Here's, I think, the crux of this particular argument. Black music is largely rooted 100% in the culture of the black person, which is a little bit different than perhaps uh, the academic approach sometimes that Western music can teach us. And if you can master the theoretical portion, and if you can master the way these rhythms and harmonies work together, you can. And if you have some personal creativity, you can write this piece or you can compose this piece.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not what happens, generally speaking, in the black community and oftentimes with music of the black culture, as an example, because it is completely birthed out of the rhythms we grew up listening to in church and out of the natural beat and syncopation that is just so present in our everyday lives, not in music necessarily, but and then and then the way we hear grandmama singing in church and the way we
Mm-hmm.
hear our aunties singing in church and the natural inflection of the speech and the natural inflection of how we bend pitches on certain things. And so then we take those things and those experiences, and when they are put into an arrangement or composition, it's a part of a whole cultural experience that oftentimes people outside of the culture don't fully understand. And the innate things that a black person may understand, and it's not about race, except here it is. The innate things that a black person may understand about the culture, others just don't. And so, as an example, when you hear those syncopated rhythms, you're like, "Oh, I like that." Or yeah, but that's not a song you sway to and snap to, or you shouldn't, because the experience of that slave wasn't. Yeah, yeah,
Wasn't joyous. Yeah. Right.
is exactly now.
Right.
Now the composer may have realized the arrangement with musical elements that may be prolific in the black experience and in the black culture. That syncopation that oftentimes you almost always hear, uh, but that does not mean that translates to. Well, I should say that the snapping as an example, whatever, that translates to something that's disrespectful
Yeah.
Just using that as an example. And I
Yeah.
think that
So
that's the rough thing. That's the thing that's really difficult.
yeah, and
And
I
maybe
agree.
if you don't know how to, sorry to interrupt you, but maybe
No, you're fine.
if you don't know how to handle the spiritual or the gospel piece, I hear that all the time. I just how to teach the gospel piece. Well, learn. You know, the last time you did a piece in a foreign language that you didn't speak, you probably consulted Google Translate at this point, or you called someone that spoke the language, or you went and researched that language and figured out how do I phonetically pronounce this, or what's the IPA for this, or how do I teach my singers. But I think the other thing, but when we say that about gospel or about spirituals or about other um, culturally specific musical art forms, or Marcus would probably say idiomatic compositions, then all of a sudden it's okay, hands off. Like,
Right.
well, don't do that. I mean, there's a happy medium.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe bring in someone who's a specialist in that, and maybe see if they can work with your kids, and maybe work with you, and see if there's something you can do. Maybe, but I do think that it is absolutely the wrong decision to say hands off,
Yeah.
because then your kids are the ones that don't get certain
No,
music.
I agree, and that's the result I'm trying to avoid too. Is that as we talk about this, that really what I'm wanting to do, and my motivation in this topic is to make it a safe space for people of all races to sing all music, because I think
Amen.
that makes us a richer humanity. Knowing though that if all people of all races are going to sing all music, then somebody's going to get it wrong sometimes. Like we're gonna, because we are gonna try to dip into a culture that we don't fully understand, and I don't think that we shouldn't try to help correct that interpretation as it goes. But I think we do need to be careful with how we do that. Instead of calling someone culturally insensitive or appropriating on a Facebook group, we could maybe send that person a
Mm-hmm.
private message saying, "Hey, I saw your choir performed this, and I have some observations if you're willing," and let them respond and kindly explain, that maybe you shouldn't snap during a song that slaves were singing in a field because they weren't happy to be slaves. That those types of things, and I think even though that would still sting for the other person to receive that message, it would, I feel like that would change our culture as a choral community to the point where we would start to feel safer and safer doing that. So and in your example that you listed too, of just, if you grow up in a culture, you have certain things that you are going to inherently understand about the music of that culture, and I would say that is true and unique. Definitely, I agreed with your point about how that does set idiomatically black music away, apart from Western classical music, right? Those are two that your description of that is totally valid. However, I would say that there are also culturally, you could call them folk music styles from cultures all over the planet that is also true of. That, the kind of the Western art music concept being academically rooted is kind of a unique invention in a lot of ways. Now, there
Agreed.
in India there is definitely some academically rooted musical systems, and in China, in ancient China, there were some academically rooted musical systems as well. But that's kind of, I think that's really what the difference is like you have to, if to me, Western art music, academically rooted, is not white music. It's music that anyone who acquires the knowledge, as you said, can go do it. Which is why I think it's like we need both. That's always been my position. We need to have the indigenous folk inherent music styles, and we need to love those and teach them and appreciate them. And we need everybody of every skin color to
Absolutely.
have access to the Western classical ideas as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you feel like that? I think my reason of kind of going on that tirade or that rant there for a second was that I feel like there are still some people that would really like to get on a soapbox about Western classical music being um, just another extension of like colonization and white supremacy and all of the other stuff, and we need to have less of it in the classroom. There is a movement out there for that.
Ooh. I probably shouldn't say anything about that.
Yeah,
I
well,
think that's unfortunate. I mean,
yeah.
I think I'm academically curious enough, um, and I think I'm intelligent enough that I can see maybe why they think that, or I can see where that came from.
Hmm.
I just don't agree with that at all, and I think I think those people probably, I dare say, just don't have a full understanding of what Western music is and what it can be, and maybe their
Hmm.
experiences have been lackluster that allows them to think and believe that. But I think the wonderful thing about America is we can have our own thoughts and beliefs. I just don't happen to be a person that subscribes to that particular
Yeah,
um,
and I don't mean to put you on the
idea.
spot. I know that that's a controversial idea. I was curious to see where you fell though, just because I feel like if I'm not to this point I'm not afraid of saying controversial things, but the way I look at it is with my students in my classroom of all colors, there is something very powerful from a brain level on a brain level of say music literacy. Can you read music? Well, there's all kinds of scientific studies being done on how learning to read music affects a kid's brain for the better. That does not mean
Hmm.
that I think that there is the practice of learning by ear in a gospel rooted church is less than. Those, in my mind, those are not the same. They're just two beautiful ways of learning to read music. But in my classroom, I'm going to teach the kids to read.
Sure.
Yet I have gotten some pushback that by me focusing my classroom on literacy, that I'm making the white way of learning music the most important one in my classroom. Is that weird to you?
Yeah. So I do think. I mean, I think you articulated it beautifully. It's not less than. It's just a different way. We're talking about
Hmm.
if we're talking about example. If a person is literate, um, in a non-musical sense, then they should be able to read or to look at letters and
Hmm.
identify that those letters form words and ideas and so on and so forth. They should be able to look at symbols. They should be able to look at a stop sign, or they should be able to look at red, yellow, green on the traffic light and know what that means. Um, and oftentimes, well, I would argue that almost every human being learns to speak and to read from hearing it first. You
Hmm.
know, we all know about the sound before sight idea, and that is one way of learning. Now, we don't stop there. Just because you speak to a baby and you speak to a 1, 2, 3 year old, and they can speak back to you, you don't stop and say, "Okay, well, you're literate now." No, we teach you what you just did. We teach you, oh, A is a letter. It says ah, B, and so on and so forth, and then eventually you get to words, and then phrases,
Hmm.
and then sentences, and then God forbid they're writing essays at some point. So I think music is no different. Um, I, I think we do lose something if given the opportunity to develop more literate musicians holistically. We elect not to, and then just to keep teaching by rote. I do think rote teaching, that's a special tool. You know, one of the things that I have an issue with, slight segue, but oftentimes I see a lot of classical musicians, or these like academics, that look down on other genres of music, or on rock musicians or gospel musicians or jazz musicians. And I would say, hey, I know some gospel musicians that are the absolute best pianist I've ever seen in my life,
Hmm.
and can synthesize harmonies and in a way that would floor doctoral piano majors.
Hmm.
I know singers that, or I know pianists that can listen to Bach and play it, but I know some DMA'd piano professors that couldn't listen to a basic 1, 4, 5 or 1, 2 flat 7 flat 3 progression, that could never produce it.
Hmm.
But but all of it, but somehow if the academics have their way, the rote teaching is somehow less than. Or I think maybe more dangerous is this. other way of, traditional literacy is greater than. I think those are both really dangerous thoughts. The idea is you're trying to make holistic musicians, and I think that literacy must play a role. If I'm in an academic situation, and that argument would never stand in another class. It would never stand in English.
Yes, thank you.
It would never stand in math.
You pulled that right out of my brain. If you weren't going to say it, I was going to say it next. We wouldn't let any other academic subject make that kind of an argument. You wouldn't tell a math teacher that a kid can use could sit down and do the problems without showing their work at the beginning of math class, because you've got to watch their process. There is a music literacy process that's very
Absolutely
valuable for them to go through at the beginning. Or if I were to sit down next to a kindergartner who's learning to read, and the sentence "a cat sat on a bed" was in front of them, and I sat down with them and I read "a cat sat" as they were reading, and then they're not reading, they're listening to me and echoing. And so we wouldn't say, "Oh yeah, no, he can read." No, he can't read unless I'm reading with him. And so there is, and I still believe this, that with music literacy, just like any other kind of literacy, which you were very astute to point out, there is a really important place for that the rote learning can't offer. But the thing is, then, that's true the other way around. There are things that rote learning can offer.
Absolutely.
That the literacy can't. And you're also right. I love this, that you said that you have to hear it though first before you can read it. So, and that's true in music also. If they have no concept of what do re mi sounds like,
Beautiful.
then you can tell them that it's do re mi, but they're not. They could sing do re mi and think they got the right answer. So I think that, I think this whole idea, this whole argument, I agree that it's dangerous. The argument being that one of them is superior in some way. But you gotta, like, the way I look at it is my black kids in my class deserve to learn this just as much as my white kids do. And so I get frustrated when I hear people label certain types of music or music learning as the white way to do it. I'm like, what does that say about my kids of color in my classroom? They are just as smart and just as capable, and I don't think anyone means it that way, but that's how I take it.
I agree.
Yeah. They every one of my kids deserves that, and so I'm going to keep doing it. I'm going to keep teaching them how to read. That's really important. So I'm going to. So I've hit you with some tough philosophical questions here. So I'm going to finish us out with a little bit more of a softball so you can relax. Is that okay? Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. So one of the other topics you mentioned as we were preparing for this that you really like to kind of talk about are rehearsal strategies and techniques and things. That's kind of one of your passions to talk about with people. So give us some bullet points of things. Like if you go do a session, for example, on rehearsal techniques and ideas, what do you share? What are your big things?
Man. Okay. What can I pull out on the spot? I think, so one of there's two overriding themes that kind of govern me as a rehearsal leader. And the first, they both come from really amazing people that I got to work with. And the first is the rehearsal. Rehearsal should be thought of as rehearing and the rehearing process. And the idea that I teach my college students is musicians are made not in those 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 minutes that they're sitting on the festival stage or the CPA or the UIL stage at the end of the school year. They're made in your rehearsal, in those 99% of time where you're in rehearsal and you're rehearing. That's how you're building and crafting musicianship into these people, not in the ability to, at the very end, to sing whatever. Mm-hmm. So that's the first thing. The second thing is if you don't understand it enough to explain it in a few words, you don't understand it enough to teach it. Now that can be treacherous. I would argue that is a true and profound statement. But so what that says is, in your rehearsals, number one, you should have an amazingly clear at Florida State, we'd call this an oral image. You actually have an amazingly clear oral image, and know and understand exactly where you're going so much that it's very simple to get people to follow you. I would argue that most of what we want from kids is slower, faster, louder, softer, more legato, and so it's more or less. That's one of the things that when I lead. There's a session that I do called Rehearsal Hacks. And that's one of the hacks is, okay, if you can, in your mind, after you understand exactly what you're looking for and what you want, if you can synthesize the nature of your instruction into more or less, your language is more or less, that simplifies, number one, it shortens the amount of time you're talking, which is utmost. Stop talking, talk less, let them sing more. But it synthesizes the amount of time you're talking, and it also makes you clarify for yourself. Before you share with your ensemble, you clarify in your mind, what is it that I really want? Uh-huh. And how can I get it by saying more of this, less of this? And it doesn't have to be, it can be things like sopranos, use more air on the high note. And then you let them sing. The 2 seconds of instruction, you let them sing. Or today, even in my collegiate rehearsal with my top choir that's very gifted, I'll say, be more together. And that's it. Mm-hmm. Instead of stopping and pontificating about make sure you're listening to this and sopranos you're dragging and altos you're whatever. Listen and be more together.
Yep.
2 seconds of instruction, and
you're trusting that they know what to do if you just give them that little bit of information.
Sure, and I'm also, if they don't, I'm forcing them to synthesize whatever talents and skills they have in the moment to be successful. And so but if I were to reverse back and say, or digress back to your initial question and say, okay, if I was going to go through rehearsal, what do I want to see? Something big that I work with my collegiate students on. They should be singing quick. When I was a teacher in public school, I used to start the beginning. Of course, you have to take roll and all that stuff because we get those things that we have to do. But I want them singing and engaged in music as quickly as possible. I used to start class sometimes with announcements, and I moved them to the end so that they're engaged in what they came to do, which is make some music. And even if that is singing hold do, and then everyone hold, and then you go from there and say sing this, or even if that's a solfege exercise on the board, they to be engaged more quickly. And then a big thing that I talk about with in warm-ups, I try to call them a vocalization period, because warm-ups has a negative connotation as, okay, this is less important than when the rehearsal actually begins. No. And so I try to have something that, number one, is pedagogical for the individual. So something in your instruction that is making the individual self-analyze, is making them self-analyze their own posture, their own, if you're going to speak for college students, their own resonance, their own placement, their own, all that stuff. And their own hand signs. Maybe that's something that can go for any level. And their own, things like that. They're having to self-analyze. And then something that, before you move to your first piece, needs to be something that, as an ensemble, we call it a unifying element. Something that focuses all your singers on the same task. And instead of them analyzing personally, they're analyzing as a group and focusing on whatever. And then you move into your rehearsal. We know that research says that the amount of time that people are able to focus dwindles as rehearsal goes on. And so, you should start with, I think you should always start them successful, but maybe don't put the hardest thing at the end of rehearsal. Put it at the beginning, and make sure you have several different, you have to, even with my college students, I find myself, you get into a habit, and you get into, okay, this is the process, and we have to learn this music. All of a sudden you look up, and that person for the last 20 rehearsals has stood in the same exact spot next to the same exact people, the same exact voices around them. And then you wonder why sometimes the energy of the room is lost, and the energy and the focus is lost. And so I have 3 or 4 different formations. 2 of them are sometimes arbitrary. I have a sectional formation where it's like SATB. Then I have a sectional formation where it's tenors, basses on the back and sopranos, altos in the front. I regularly go into section circles so that they're changing formation. Sometimes I'll say upper voices, and we'll have soprano ones and tenor ones, and they'll partner often, just so that there's some variety in rehearsal, because we need that. And, make sure you have several different ways of addressing what you want to address so that the same exact tool is not used every single time because that mentally, turns them off. And, biggest thing though, succinct instructions. Succinct instructions. Like, man, stop talking. Let them make music and pick your music in a way and structure your rehearsals in a way and your instruction in a way where most of the time they are making the music. And here's what I've learned: if I'm having to pontificate for 45 seconds or 2 or 3 minutes, then I probably skipped a step. It's probably my fault as a rehearsal leader, and I probably skipped ahead, and so I'm having to stop and explain whatever because I jumped ahead, and it's probably my fault, and I have to go back. I get to observe lots of good teachers, great choirs, but I think one of the things that we all can work on that I think I see more in younger teachers is they want so badly to get to making music that you skip the steps. Like let them solfege for a while. Let them, or whatever your syllable, your processes, numbers. Let them do that for a while before you start talking about legato lines. They're still reading do re mi. You ever talking about legato and dynamics and expression and articulation, and this is their first reading or second reading, or anyway. So
yeah. Yeah, no, it sounds like you and I. It sounds like you and I have a very similar philosophy on all those things, which is awesome. I for example, your very first tip just now with the be more together. One my little catchphrase. The choir might have started the first measure of something. I've already started them because there were 10 problems, and I could list the 10 problems, but instead I'll just say, clean it up. Go again, because they know. I'm trusting that they know what they did wrong, and even if they only clean up 7 of the 10 problems, I just wasted no time in rehearsal, and we got 7 of the 10 problems fixed. So yeah, it's really important. So yeah, good. That's awesome. So we'll go ahead and close there by allowing you one more chance to say if on any of the topics that we covered tonight. Is there anything that you wanted to say that I didn't give you a chance to say?
Whoa, that's dangerous. Man, we talked about so much.
Yeah.
We talked about so much. If I had to pull something out, I think the thing that's on my brain right now is, we were talking about like things that innately involve culture and innately involve race and all those things. It's so easy to focus on the things that separate us. One of the things I think we were going to talk about was the idea of like the identity of the person versus the identity of the group. And one of the things I was in thinking about that, and I'm going to try to tie it all in, but in thinking about that, one of the things that I think is really terribly important, especially for your underrepresented populations, whether that's racially underrepresented, or if they're gender minorities, or if you have gay or lesbian or transgendered students. I think that's going to become more and more present in our classrooms. But it's important that you don't erase what makes that person that individual. I'm a male, and it's important. People always say, "Well, we're all one race," and this whole idea of the American melting pot is. I think those are both very accurate, but I'm a black man, and don't try to erase the black off of my name and just say, okay, well, no, we're all the same. Like, no, we're not. We are, but our experiences are different, and my identity is built on who I am and my experiences. So you can't erase that. Or if, and you have to be aware of it, especially as a teacher. You have to be aware that these things mean something. Mm-hmm. That my Mexican student is not the same as my Puerto Rican student, who is not the same as my Brazilian, and is not the same as Spanish. And you can't just say that they're Mexican, which I see sometimes, or and that the young kid in my choir that's gay and struggling with his sexuality, man, that's eaten his whole entire life potentially. Like, that's all that's concerning him. Or the trans. I've had several transgendered students at this point, and man, you have to be before we care about do re mi, before we care about beautiful tone, before I care about all those things, I have to tap in, hopefully, to what this kid is experiencing, which means I have to be aware of who they are as the individual and who they are as what their lived experiences are. And then hopefully I can take them from where they're at and usher all my students forward. And what's the vehicle I use? Music. I think it is important. We talk about representation. This is what I'm getting to. I think it is absolutely important that we go out of our way to program more than Brahms, and out of our way to program more than male composers. The other day, I talked to my choral methods kids, and I said, "Hey, who are your favorite composers?" I made them stop at 13, but of course, they had a lot of amazing composers. They had Brahms, Mozart. I think one of them had Mahler. They had Beethoven. They had Jake Runstad. They had Eric Whitacre, Moses Hogan, Stacey Gibbs, all those folks. But I said, there's a Jocelyn Hagen that you should probably think about putting on that list. There's a Undine Smith Moore. There's an Elaine Hagenberg. There is a Brittany Boykin. There is a Marcus Garrett, who you should probably go out of your way. And so we all agreed it's much easier to program the music that we're more familiar with, but maybe it would do more and be more inclusive and allow for representation if we were able to look a little bit harder, dig a little bit more, dig a little deeper, and find those gems from those underrepresented composers. And no, I'm not saying program this piece just because this person's black or just because this person's transgendered. If I hear that again, I'm gonna hurt somebody. But I'm saying when I'm faced with two pieces that may be of equal quality and equal function, I'm probably going to go with this underrepresented, because it's, I think, a responsibility of us that have whatever platform we have in education to do that. And I think we take it out. We should take that with us when we go out. I can't tell you how often people talk about programming and cultural representation for ensembles. But in your private voice lesson, are you also programming music by transgender composers? Are you still sticking with the 28 Italian songs? When you go to, are you going to Walmart for every single piece of grocery that you need? Or are you also, so let me go to a black owned grocery store. Are you going to the same mechanic? Or are you saying, hey, you know what? I think I might want to go support another mechanic. Those things. You're going to the same exact store to buy your clothes. Are you always doing Tommy Hilfiger? Or maybe try another intentionally Asian owned outfitter or whatever. So I don't know. These are conversations I think we need to have if we expect our tomorrows to be better, and if we expect the lives of the generations that come after to be better than our experiences, then we have to start doing these things with intent. So that's the last thing I would probably say.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time and for your contribution. My goal on this show is to try to get these conversations started, even if not everybody agrees with everything that you just said or what I just said. I think it matters that we're talking about it. Like that, to me, that is a huge step that I've seen going on the last couple of years. So I really appreciate your contribution to the conversation.
It was my pleasure, man. I love this. You got to do this more often.
Yeah.
It's like made my whole week.
Oh, well, that's good. Right?
Okay.
Be in touch.
All right. Have a good night.
All right. Bye. Thank you, as always, for sticking around to the end of the episode. And if you are a regular listener to this show, I just cannot tell you how much I appreciate you and sticking with it and being a part of these conversations. If you are a new listener to the show, I appreciate you as well, and I hope that you stick around. And so as listeners to the show that stick all the way through an episode, I always like to give you some reminders at the end of ways that you can help support the mission of this show. Of course, hitting up the sponsors and using your promo code is a huge deal. It helps me keep the lights on. One of my goals is always for the show to pay for itself, and those sponsorships and the Patreon memberships for as little as $3 a month help to do that. This running a show like this is not free. So far in the first year of the show, I consider myself very blessed that the show has broken even. meaning I have gotten enough revenue to come in to cover the cost of the show. Not making a profit yet, but that's okay, because if I believe that if I can keep breaking even and having the show pay for itself, then I could keep doing this for the rest of my teaching career, and this is so much fun to do it, but I ultimately can't afford to pay for it all by myself. So help us out in that way. If you can, either join patreon.com/Choralosophy, or use that promo code when you use your Sight Reading Factory, when you do your vocevista.com, when you do your graphite publishing or your Ryan Main purchases. Any of those promo code uses helps me a lot, letting them know that you're listening and keeping those partnerships vital. The other thing that I thought I'd let you know at the end of this episode is that I've been promising 2 episodes per month. Well, February was 4. So I don't get used to it, and I won't be bothering you as much anymore in the next month. In fact, my plan is to take a little bit of a spring break from the show. I already have a March episode recorded. February was very busy for Choralosophy. I recorded a total of 5 episodes this month. And going to spend some family time on spring break. And of course, contest time at school is coming up. So I've got my March episode already recorded, and that'll be out to you soon. But that does not mean you can't contact me and discuss show topics. Choralosophers@gmail, of course, the Choralosophy@gmail, or the Choralosophers Facebook page or the Patreon. Those are all still open during the month of March. Feel free to reach out. Let's have the conversations. Just know that you're not going to be seeing a bunch more episodes until April. So stay tuned, and we will be back at it as the spring progresses.